How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we're going to talk about toxic traits in corrections. Today we're going to kind of go into what they are, how they develop, and what we can do first within ourselves to correct that concern, but also what leadership, our peers, and supervisors can do, because we do not want these toxic traits to exist in our profession. Now, granted, there are some that kind of go in having those toxic traits already, unfortunately, and they just haven't been weeded out. But there is some that, unfortunately, they come in with the right mindset, and eventually they wind up developing toxic traits. So we're going to go ahead and go over how that occurs, and then what we can do both on our side, our intentionality towards that, and then also what leadership and our peers and supervisors can do. It's going to be a great dialogue. Hey, guys, don't forget, I got a lot of books on the market. Please check it out. I got them in the description. I got links to both of my books on Amazon that I have out there through Amazon, which is Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries. And then I also have a list of about 5 other books, and I have one other book coming out soon that's all published by Blue 360 Media. That new book will also be for rookie staff, just passages of good, solid information. And what I did in the description is I just copied the link to my books in general. It's just one link. Then you click it, and then you can get whatever book you're looking at to buy. I made it a little bit more simpler instead of individualized links. All right, let me get Russ on. What up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going, sir?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. My name's Russ Hamilton. I'm a former sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career way back in the late 1980s, 1989, in fact, at San Quentin State Prison. I'm also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I am also currently working for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail and a local county probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook. That's chaos with a K. And that particular site is dedicated to the brave men and women of correctional law enforcement, and also anyone else who works in the great correctional field. And we just do a lot of, training, support, history, knowledge, content, that kind of thing. I'm also found here pretty regularly, I would say, on Here Talk.
Yes, and we love having you. Now, guys, I had a recent discussion with Joe Paponio, and we were talking about shadowing. And basically, what are the signs you're shadowing a good senior officer? What are the signs that you're shadowing a bad senior officer or senior staff member? So then we decided that what we're going to do is we looked at the signs of a bad person to shadow, the traits, and we said, you know what, let's develop this into a show of how these traits come to be. And that's kind of what this topic is going to be again. It's going to be basically discussing how these traits kind of grow within us and then what we can do to stop it. All right, so the first thing I have right now is persistent negativity. And what I took note of here for persistent negativity is, now remember, guys, this is through time, the course of time in this profession. So you got chronic stress from high stakes environment with little downtime. You got the feelings of being undervalued or unsupported by leadership or peers. You got the exposure to colleagues who model negative attitudes, creating a cycle of toxicity. And then you got the lack of recognition or appreciation. I would actually go as far as saying appreciation more so for hard work, leading to resentment and frustration. Now, why is this a concern? So let's just stay first with why is this a concern, Russ, and how it cultivates, and then we'll talk about how to address it. So why is it a concern? It's because negativity lowers team morale and can quickly spread, creating a hostile working environment. Also fosters disengagement, reduces productivity, and increases turnover. So before we talk about how to address it, Russ, why do these concerns present themselves?
Well, when we just start out with what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the interactions that we have are, at the base of their true function, they're very negative. It's very hard to interject any kind of positivity into those things. That doesn't mean that we can't take positive aspects away from it, though. We are enforcing rules, we're enforcing laws, we're enforcing a sentence on that whole population of inmates, and they're going to have a level of resentment for us. They're going to have a level of resentment for their situation, and they are going to necessarily lash out for those reasons. I think that the important thing, though, for us to take away is, hey, that is the way that it is. We're there to enforce the rules. We're there to enforce the sentence, and that's just the nature of the beast. And those are the reasons that those things crop up, because there are a lot of things that go along with that, including, holdovers and potentially, some PTSD type scenarios, and just, the kind of thing that, just hangs over our emotional state.
Yeah, and the one thing that gets to me here before we kick into what we can do about it is where it says exposure to colleagues who model negative attitudes, creating a cycle of toxicity. What's funny is we tend to be attracted by people who share our same thoughts. So you figure that if I'm negative, I'm going to be connected to other negative people, and negativity spreads like a wildfire in corrections. It spreads a lot faster than positivity, and I think that's because negativity is more passive. It just happens, where positivity in this profession may be more of an intentional effort. But with that said, I do find that when people tend to be positive, they avoid conflict. And what they do is they wind up isolating that negative individual. So it kind of forces that individual to only be around negative people. I remember that in my career, where the people that were negative, you just didn't want to be bothered by them. I just don't want to hear any more negativity. So you wind up avoiding them or dreading interactions with them. But I think in this case here, you got to lean into that. You got to engage with them a bit more. And then maybe even as a supervisor, as a peer, get them to be more specific with their concerns, because a lot of their negativity can usually come through a misunderstanding or an unfair generalization. So usually when you get them to hold to some level of specifics, they usually start to kind of think on it a little bit more, as opposed to just accepting things as they come. And I kind of now actually think about it's kind of crossing to how to address it. So I might as well get to that. So I got how to address it, Russ. Individually, you practice gratitude and focus on small wins, identify sources of stress, and seek constructive outlets. I did this too, actually, such as journaling, exercise, or counseling. Guys, if you notice the books I've written, a lot of them are passages. That's just me venting. I mean, that's pretty much what I did. Was I vented and I said, you know what? I don't think I'm the only person that can benefit from these thoughts. So I shared them with my peers. I shared them with the people on this channel, whatever it is. And then I wind up sharing them with the world. And it turned out to be extremely beneficial, not just for the people receiving it, but also very beneficial for me. And as a team leader, you got to acknowledge and address valid concerns through open communication, implement recognition programs, or I like to say more appreciation. Show appreciation. Most of us aren't looking for recognition, which is more of a one-time event, but rather we're looking for appreciation. We're looking for continued appreciation for the work we do, even no matter how basic it may be in some cases. And validate staff contribution and foster positivity. Russ, what's your thoughts on all that? There's a lot there.
Yeah, I would just say that the thing is we know that we operate oftentimes in a negative environment. And, it's really just a choice if we're going to, reflect that negativity back to everything and everyone around us, or if we're going to just choose to not internalize it and choose, to see the upside in the things that we do. I'm not one to, sugarcoat things or not be honest about the things that we're affronted with in corrections, but so much of it truly is just a choice. And if you'll get in there and you'll find the silver lining, and you'll pay attention to that, if you'll call attention to that, and make sure that the people around you are appreciated, they'll appreciate you back, and you can operate. You can operate under that type of environment a lot longer than you can under an extremely negative one. Just go out there and do the best that you can do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes we trap ourselves into accepting the negative, and we may not realize we're doing that. And the moment we accept it, the next step is we fall into some level of hopelessness, which actually winds up keeping us only looking at the negative. That's why it's good for positive people who have positive mindsets, just to kind of shift where where that negative mindset tends to be looking. And guys, I know a lot of people may think, oh, Gandry, you're being optimistic and just a pessimistic world. And it's not that case, guys. You have to do it for your own survival. It's a very intentional effort, because the more you start to accept it, the more you will start getting feelings of hopelessness. So I always tell people, just got to change where you're looking, because sometimes you don't realize it, but where you're looking or the thoughts that go in your head, they keep you in that same negative mindset. Sometimes it's just a matter of changing where you're looking, and then just changing how you think of things, how you see things, because what goes on in our head also matters. So I find myself, be honest with you, is I think it's a lot easier, and this is sad, to push the positive down and accept the negative. And you don't want that to be 25, 30 years of your career. You don't want the negative to be screaming inside your head, and the positive to only be a whisper. Because I guarantee you the positive is there. Just got to be more intentional into listening to it. And then eventually the positive starts to scream a little bit louder, and the negative starts to set back. All right. So that's one. And I agree with that. I believe that's 100% true. Cutting corners. So how does this develop? So we got overconfidence in knowing the system and believing certain rules are unnecessary. That's a new one, Russ. I'd love to get your thoughts on that when we get to it. Pressure to meet quotas, deadlines, or reduce staffing, leading to shortcuts. And I've seen that. Complacency due to routine tasks and familiarity with operations, and observing others cutting corners without facing consequences. So why is this a concern? Well, cutting corners undermines safety, compromises accountability, and can lead to serious incidents. It also sets a dangerous precedent that encourages others to follow suit. And that's where we always get concerned with practice, training, practice, as opposed to, policy and procedure being our anchor, being our foundation. What's your thoughts on this, Russ? This is definitely a new thought here, where these overconfidence in knowing the system and believing certain rules are unnecessary. And the other one, which we discussed kind of before, but pressures to meet quotas, deadlines, or reduce staffing, leading to shortcuts.
Okay, so two main things here at play that jump out to me is number one, not necessarily knowing the why behind the policies and procedures and the corners that we're trying to cut. Streamlining can be good. Streamlining can be, even safety enhancement. The other thing, though, is, cutting corners, from the institutional perspective, and then just, being forced, then for you to take it upon themselves. Hey, you know what? They cut my manpower. So then where do I make the cuts? And so you just end up passing it down the line, which is natural. But the thing is you can still end up, cutting your nose off to spite your face in situations where you've made things potentially more dangerous. But those are the things that were often, passed down from above, and often things that we're not empowered to do anything about. I see right now the big complaint inside the California system is, just being forced to do more and more with less and less. And so at that institutional level and being forced to do it, then people throw up their hands and just say, well, what the heck, we got to start cutting corners. And that may indeed be the case, because you're going to come up against a wall of diminishing returns beyond which you're unable to go without making sacrifices. So people, the management and administrative levels, should be aware of that, and not just, do things and just, well, you know what, they've always handled it before, so they'll always handle it in the future. That may not be the case.
Yeah, and guys, for the pressure to meet quotas, deadlines, or reduce staffing, leading to shortcuts, I want to mention something on this too. Sometimes that pressure which can wind up shifting a person's mindset to where urgency or the important winds up getting sacrificed for what's urgent. And then that becomes the norm. And that's not how we should ever be. Urgency, I granted sometimes it could shift things in priority, but having said that, we got to watch out when the urgency becomes the norm and the important is what gets sacrificed. So I've seen that. I mean, I think everybody in corrections right now has seen that at some level, from management all the way down to front line. And I just wanted the overconfidence in knowing the system. I have seen that. And what I want to mention to that is there are some people, even as senior staff, that tend to stop wanting to learn, and they wind up just continuing things as they are and not as it should be. And they don't want to ask for help because they don't even think they need the help. Another scary thing is they don't know what they don't know, and they get overconfident in their own interpretation of what's needed. And then what happens here is if someone does implement something new that is needed, they'll minimize or dismiss it. And the next thing you know, that expectation is not being done. One is because that senior staff member just doesn't think it's necessary. And two, for the most part, they also may even find it to be overburdensome because it breaks them away from their routine. And guys, we're going to get it eventually, but Russ will do a book on complacency eventually, which is one of our worst enemies here. But I definitely do see people getting complacent in their habits, and what was once determined to be policy and procedure once then turns into or transitions into cutting corners that become practices. So now you have a legacy being exchanged of, I'm a senior officer and I'm not really training people on policy and procedure, but the practices, the shortcuts, what's convenient. And then eventually, sadly, that's what gets passed down. And usually what gets affected by that the most is the basics. So even as management and supervisors, we may not know that's even happening until something fails at such a basic level that it causes us to revisit, because there's always an assumption that the basics are being done, unfortunately, until they're not. How to address it. So individually, Russ, I got reflect on the potential consequences of ignoring rules. So this is as an individual. And commit to professional standards, even under pressure, and view policies as safeguards, not obstacles. And I like that a lot. As a team or as leadership, regularly reinforce the importance of policy adherence, address breaches promptly, and provide training that highlights the consequences of shortcuts. And I like what Russ said, provide training that definitely introduces the why, the buy-in. If you don't have a why, you're not translating buy-in. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, because we want all staff to be plugged into the process of understanding why things happen, what allows things to happen, and the circumstances under which we operate. If you don't know those things, you have developed a blind spot, for the reason that we do things. It's just like, you have, a bunch of, new people showing up, and you hand them a flashlight and you tell them, hey, go count each inmate in every cell and come back to me with a number. So what is it that they're out there doing or not doing? Do they understand the importance of making sure that the inmate that they're counting is an actual inmate, that inmate is alive, that inmate is, not in any immediate danger of dying? Or do you just say, hey, you know what, close enough is good enough? And so the reason that we make sure that we're counting that, and I hate the term, but, living, breathing flesh, because that makes no sense, in my opinion. Why is it that we're actually doing that? Well, because somewhere along the line, somebody died in the middle of the night. Somewhere along the line, somebody put a dummy in a bed. So if you don't understand and know the why, you might miss something along the way before that count actually comes to fruition. Maybe you go into a cell and you see an inmate has, saved a bunch of, hair that he's clipped off of his head. Well, why has he done that? Is that hair that he saved that's, in a cup on his thing? Could that be considered contraband? Could that maybe possibly even be considered, preparation to escape? Could be. if you're not clued into that, why do you even care? You just, count them and move on, right?
Right. And as we said before, policy and procedures are the lifeblood of any facility. For you to ignore it, you're ignoring the history of why that policy and procedure was put in play, whether it strengthens what works or was put in play to stop people from falling back to a default that just doesn't work in this facility or for the agency. All right. So now, over familiarity with inmates. So how does this develop? Now, we've written books on this. This is rather a shortened version of it all, but how does this develop? So we could see it develop in a few ways. Nothing's absolute here, guys, but just kickstart a dialogue. So how it develops: isolation or lack of support from peers, leading officers to seek validation from inmates. A desire to maintain peace by being overly friendly, or we talked about trying to be popular over being respected. Misjudging professional boundaries as trust develops over time. And this could definitely come when you're working in that housing unit or working with an inmate. And eventually what happens is, because of your constant interactions with them, the boundaries start to blur. And then overconfidence. Oh, wait, and one other thing with misjudging professional boundaries: if you put them in a position where you wind up feeling obligated to them, like a porter or a maintenance worker, got to be very wary of that. As at the end of the day, an inmate's an inmate. You don't want to ever be obligated to an inmate. And overconfidence in the ability to handle manipulative behavior. That's for the people that don't think it could ever happen to them. So why is this a concern? So overfamiliarity weakens authority, compromises safety, and opens the door for manipulation. It also undermines team trust and creates security vulnerabilities, which we've seen time and time again. What do you got here, Russ?
So, yeah, I mean, probably this particular thing is perhaps the thing that we have addressed most over time. But the thing is, we have labels that we want to maintain, where we keep most of ourselves, separated from what the inmate sees. We want them to only see the professional us, the person, that's behind the badges, not for them to really, look at or become acquainted with. Because when we start to, feel as if we owe them something, and this is where I always drag up the term quid pro quo, which just means this for that, is we're exchanging pleasantries in order for us to bring things down a notch with regards to the way that we view safety and security, and things like, searches or inventorying their property, or, allowing them a little bit extra this or that. And so when that impacts, on what we're doing, and we allow that to fester and get out of control, that's really when it can necessarily become an issue, because we're just not as on guard. And I don't think that there's probably any better real true example than this. I was talking to an officer one time, about the need for care with overfamiliarity, and care with being careful not to be manipulated. And their pat answer was, well, I could never, I would never do anything illegal. I could never be corrupted. And I was like, who said anything about corruption? How about just, you're taken off of your game a little bit and put into a position of comfort so that they can exploit something else? They don't have to corrupt you in order for them to be able to breach security. And the person was just kind of, taken off guard by that, because they didn't understand it's not an all or nothing proposition. There are degrees, layers, and gradients along the way.
Yeah, and guys, as I said, I'm very involved in this topic. I believe it's definitely something that should be included, ongoing refreshers, because we have more interactions with the inmates than we ever did before. So human nature, there's always that chance that lines could blur. And those refreshers are just a reminder of where we stand in the moment. And they help guide us through every interaction, so we're not brought down into this rabbit hole. And the funny thing is, guys, for people that don't think it can't happen to them, guys, there's a game for everyone. And most of these games are developed through an inmate taking advantage of a vulnerability or a situation. And these are things that we may not be able to control. A vulnerability, it's good for us to be aware of it. so we know it's there. But situations, we're not always able to control that. You know, I've had situations where a supervisor embarrassed me, and the inmates were there to pick me up. And I became very confused in that brief moment. But then I realized where my ground needs to be. And, you know, I went back and worked things out with my supervisor. But I have seen people have bad moments, maybe officer to officer. And next thing you know, the one officer decides, screw this, and cuts himself off from every officer. And now this officer, when they need help, they're not going to staff anymore. They're slowly starting to go to the inmates. It's a slow and subtle shift. So definitely something that we need to be mindful of. Now I want to get to the, so let me see, individually, which we did already. Oh, no, sorry. Did I do how to address it yet, Russ?
Yeah.
I did that, right?
Yeah.
All right. So now let's go to the next one, which is, well, just in case, individually, you maintain a clear understanding of professional boundaries. Remember the manipulative tendencies inherent in the inmate population. And as a team leader or as a team itself, provide regular training on boundaries and manipulation tactics, foster a supportive team environment to reduce isolation and encourage professional relationships. Hey, I want to mention something about that too. That's another area, isolation. A lot of us, when we see an officer getting too involved with an inmate, maybe it is a game that the inmate's employing. Let's just say that the officer is not aware that they're going down a rabbit hole. A lot of us rather avoid that officer than to step up to that officer and tell him, hey, this relationship looks a little funny between you and the inmate. And the reason why is a lot of us, one, may not want the conflict with that officer, or we may be more worried about, what about if we're wrong? Well, the bigger concern is, what if you're right? So I know when you have officers that seem to get too involved, what we rather do, and this is a scary thing, is we rather talk about them to everyone else than to actually get involved, step up, and be our brother or sister's keeper. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, you always have to step in. You know, I've often told the story about, you know, starting as a sergeant in culinary, and the first thing, you know, they were doing is they were coming to me and you know, talking about a cook and the relationship that she might be or not be having with an inmate. And I was like, whoa, you know, I guess maybe nobody was listening to them before. And so what we immediately did is you know, made a quick call over to investigations, made sure we weren't stepping on any toes. I had somebody, you know, go down and search his things, came up with drugs and a couple of love letters, and then that was the end of that. You know, I walked in on the middle of something there, but they simply didn't have they just didn't have enough supervision in their area and younger officers overall, and they weren't sure what to do about the situation. But it was a good learning curve for them.
Yes, and an immediate wake-up call too. Okay, so we have poor communication habits. So how does this develop? So sadly, this could develop between stress or burnout, reducing patience and emotional intelligence. We just don't have time for it. I'm just tired. I'm burnt out. I don't have time to engage in conversation with anyone. Prioritizing tasks over interpersonal interactions due to time constraints. Actually, you see this a lot with management, where we get so overwhelmed with the tedious tasks that could be coming our way that we forget to engage with our people. And I'm assuming that could also happen on a supervisory level. And the way we're understaffed now, I could see that also happening on a frontline level as well. I just have too much on my plate that I don't have time to interact with my staff anymore or my peers. And that's why lineup is very important as well, because it does force those interactions so we can at least communicate and remember each other, that we exist. Because when you're not communicating and you're spending your day, let's say, just most of the time communicating with the inmates, that separation could wind up hurting you in the long run. It kind of makes you forget where your initial resources are to some extent, where your loyalty goes to. I mean, if I know the inmates, you know, or I'm interacting with the inmates more than I do with my own peers, I think that could be a concern, because you need that balance. That's why, real quick, if you're working in an isolated area, supervisors should try to find a way to get more staff to you to visit you, or maybe take more trips themselves into that area. So, you keep that person connected to the right side of the line. You got lack of training or emphasis on communication skills in high pressure situations. And you got modeling poor communication behaviors from peers or leadership. So why is this a concern, Russ? Poor communication increases misunderstandings, weakens teamwork, and can lead to operational failures. It also creates tension and resentment among colleagues. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah. So, every time I see an action that is really and truly actually an inaction, what I want to do is I want to try and contrast it and decide whether or not this is a cause or it's an effect. So I think that, when we're talking about poor communication, I think that that's an effect of the toxicity that someone is already stewing in, because they're starting to isolate themselves. They're deciding that, they're not going to be, part of the team. That they're withdrawing from the unit, they're withdrawing from the department, and they've just made a conscious decision to bench themselves. They're no longer in the game, and so part of that is poor communication, which, as I said, is no longer a cause. It's just an effect of what's going on, and that can be kind of contrasted and taken to other things that we might see in people when we start evaluating, is what this person displaying, is that a cause or is that an effect? And it's a very important way to try and look at things in order to try and find a way to change that. We want people to be plugged into the process. We want them to participate with whatever it is that we're doing. And so, time to give them a wake-up call, ask them what's going on, give them the kind of tasks that they're going to easily succeed at, but ones that might bring them back to life a little bit. Something that that kind of stimulates the correctional law officer in all of us, so to speak.
Yeah, and I like that. These are all interrelated. They could bleed into each other, or they could be isolated. But technically, I like what Russ said. I think most of the time, if you got one trait, it's going to ripple effect into probably all these different traits, because I think they're just all so connected. And then I got, why is it I'm sorry, how to address it. So individually, you develop active listening skills and focus on delivering clear, respectful messages, and be mindful of tone and body language, especially under stress. And as a team leader or peers, whatever leadership, provide regular training on communication and conflict resolution, encourage open dialogue, and ensure that constructive feedback is normalized. I want to mention something too, guys. We talk about conflict a lot. Conflict helps. If we are allowed to speak, we tend to be more committed. We tend to actually wind up building more investment in what we're doing. But when we're talking about conflict, you got to have trust underneath it. It's okay for us to conflict on ideas. It's not personal. But you need conflict, and you need to be engaged in that, so everybody feels heard and everybody feels invested. So again, I know a lot of times when you have these separations, it's because most people rather avoid each other than actually engage in conflict to straighten things out. And all that does is pretty much leave negative assumptions. I mean, that's pretty much what it is, what you assume someone's thinking. All right, so now the next one I got is unique, Russ. Inconsistent behavior. I found this to be interesting. And I'm sure we've seen this. So inconsistent behavior, how it develops. So stress or burnout causing emotional volatility. And so I think about this, to be honest with you, real quick. When it comes to stress or burnout, because we're not engaged, we may be more focused on what's convenient, what takes less energy, and then eventually that's going to lead to inconsistency. So I do see that happening in some cases. That's where management also has to be aware or doing their best to avoid stress or burnout, because to be honest with you, this may be harder for someone to control. They're tired. They don't have the energy. So they're just doing things that are more convenient just to get through the moment because they're burned out. So they're not giving you 100% because they don't have 100% to give. I just wish that we could recognize that more in ourselves, and then hopefully we could tell somebody who helps us out, or maybe if we have to stay, puts us on a post that may require sort of less energy, if that's even possible in corrections, because even being vigilant requires 100% or 110% effort. Adapting behavior to personal convenience rather than professional standards, which I just said. Fear of repercussions leading to a play it safe attitude only when under supervision. This is unique because corrections, it's not something you want to micromanage. You got to empower your people to, as long as they're competent and they have integrity, you want to empower them in the how behind the work being done. But if you have individuals who just want to play it safe, who pretty much don't want to do any more than they're supposed to, then what winds up happening here is they just lack the effort. And now practices that should be done full scale are usually inconsistent, not even just with that individual, but with everyone around them. That's why we got to always make sure people are on the same page. And it's not about playing it safe here in corrections. It's not about just doing that prescribed role. It's more about stepping up and embracing the challenges that are coming your way so you can adapt and adjust. And you really want a team that's able to do that. And then lack of commitment to policy enforcement or professional integrity. And why is that a concern? So inconsistent behavior confuses expectations, reduces trust, and undermines authority. It creates a perception of favoritism or unreliability, damaging team cohesion. I wanted to mention something, Russ, and we talked about this when I was doing the mentor or the shadowing episode with Joe. One of the things that I found when I was a rookie, when I was shadowing a senior staff, is I would look for consistency because I thought that was a strength. If I noticed that someone was consistent with what they had to, the rules they had to enforce, the procedures, whatever it is, I found that to be something I admired in the individual because it showed me that they embraced conflict. They were able to stand their ground. But for me, it was funny. When I saw people acting one way, but then when the supervisors or a stronger professional peer came in, they act somewhere different. That was my first red flag that this person may not be someone I want to shadow. What's your thoughts, Russ, on being on inconsistent behavior?
So, yeah, I think that once again, we're looking at the effect of something else that's going on with an individual. When we approach things inside corrections, we should be, on point with what we're doing, and there should be an intentionality. There's a time and a place, for instance, to maybe take some kind of a harsh tone or whatever with an inmate, and then there's a time, another time to let an inmate buy with something or give them something or provide them with something that they've got coming. People that are not on point with that, not being intentional, and are being swayed by their present emotional state, are not doing that. A guy is, yelling at an inmate one day, and then the next day, the same behavior by the inmate gets them where, hey, he's just ignoring what the inmate's doing. That person is not operating on what we would call best of practices. So the things that we do, the reasons that we do them, have to be, ensconced inside of, how would I put this? Inside of our intentional selves. What is it that I'm attempting to? What am I attempting to accomplish with this interaction with this inmate? Maybe he needs a little bit of verbal discipline with regards to, he's got a messy cell or something, or maybe this inmate is acting so far off the chain right now. I need him to lay down on the ground so I can place him in cuffs. And we respond to those things at the appropriate levels of our behavior, and it should be predictable in the sense that we have a hierarchy of the way that we react to things. Not that we're being predictable with with things that impact safety and security from the inmate's point of view, but predictable from the fact that, hey, if an inmate is doing this, I'm going to react appropriately and pretty much the same way within the same bounds every time. And if you're not doing that, it's just an indicator that, hey, this unit, this officer, this set of circumstances could go any which way at any time, and there's no predicting it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I usually separate predictability from expectation. That's the expectation, and if that's predictable, that's fine. But note that this is an expectation. This is something that should be expected from both sides. Where I get what you're saying. I mean, there is some level of professional predictability in our job, but usually I fall that into expectations. This is what's expected of us, because you're right. I don't want people thinking that our security routines are predictable. There's an expectation. We have to provide it, but you don't need to know, like let's say tours. You don't need to know when and where I'm coming down. I'm going to, change the routine a bit. I want to mention something here too with this before we get into how it addresses it. I kind of touched on it before, but when it comes to inconsistent behavior, that's why you want to be internally motivated when you're issuing those correctional objectives. You want to stand by it as if you're the owner of it, because you should be. You don't want to be externally motivated. You don't want to be only doing it because someone else is telling you to do it, or at this time the person's next to you and you want to do what's right by them because they're watching you, because you're afraid of consequences of not doing it. No, you're doing the right thing because you know it to be the right thing. So take ownership in the work and don't try to externally justify it. So how to address this? So individually, reflect on the importance of consistency and align actions with policies, regardless of convenience. Seek support to manage stress and prevent burnout. And that's the intentional effort. As a team leader, or as a team or leadership, whatever, leadership should model consistent behavior and address inconsistencies constructively, establish clear expectations, and hold everyone accountable to the same standards. Real quick, a big moment where you could see this is when you have partners in a unit. And sometimes you could either see that they're operating in complete conflict of each other, or they're operating in this way that complements each other. It's good to see two officers that may be slightly opposite in how they handle things, as long as they complement each other. You don't want them to be such extreme opposites that they're in conflict with each other. And that's where even good supervisors or peers can see that. I could see that, Russ runs a unit one way, Ganji runs it another way, but when they work together, they complement each other, and that works. But God forbid Russ runs it in this extreme manner, and then Ganji runs it in this extreme manner, and then all of a sudden it just doesn't work because they're not complementing, they're in conflict. And I want to mention one thing. We talked about this before. That authority, that balance of authority comes somewhere between being assertive and professionally empathetic. It's somewhere within that line. So usually anywhere within that line, you can complement each other. But if Russ decides I'm going to be ultra aggressive all day and Ganji decides I'm going to be ultra soft, they don't complement each other. They shouldn't be done to begin with. Those are two extremes that will conflict. And you got a unit that's able to, play mommy and daddy all day. Mommy said no, daddy's going to say yes. In this scenario, Russ will be the mother actually in this one, as approved by ChatGPT. All right. I'm joking. Okay, so hold on. Let's see. All right. So now that brings us to resistance to questions or feedback. So how does this develop? Insecurity or fear of appearing incompetent. Ego or a belief that questions challenge authority. So I see this a lot. You have people that have such a high ego that if you go to ask them a question, even though my question is rooted in curiosity, they take the question as if it's judgment. And then it just doesn't create a good situation where we're going to exchange a dialogue. Frustration from constant interruptions in high pressure situations. I guess that's more of in the moment. And then a culture that discourages collaboration or promotes individualism over teamwork. I want to mention something. To be honest, if you have a high pressured moment, especially if you're in a position of leadership, or maybe that supervisor that's running it, you may not have time to answer questions. It may be just I got to get through this. So I'm not 100% against that.
What should be on the banner at the screen here? What one was that again?
Good point. Resistance
Okay.
to questions or feedback. Yeah, thanks, Russ.
Okay.
Appreciate that. And then, as I mentioned, a culture that discourages collaboration or promotes individualism over teamwork. Corrections. When I first came in, it was a hierarchy, absolute power to some extent, where it was just authority being pushed down. I don't think that's ever really been beneficial. And now we've been leaning more towards more of an open dialogue between frontline and management, hopefully, or frontline and their supervisors, that allows for information to be traveled up and down. So we do truly work in the benefit of the facility by helping the supervisors discover things that they wouldn't know unless they did talk to the front line, but also for the supervisors, translating the why behind the work so we can get more investment from the people that are doing the job. And then why is this a concern? So resistance to feedback stifles learning, innovation, and collaboration. It creates an unapproachable work environment and perpetuates mistakes. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, it's easy to come across officers who are just, rooted in some type of defiance toward you, for no other reason than, you happen to, outrank them, or that you are their supervisor, or that you are, in some position of authority over them, even if it's only in the moment. And when you look at those individuals who are engaging in behavior like that, I mean, it's really truly concerning, because they're not doing this resistance to just questions and feedback, but to every little part of the directive that you give them. I'll never forget. I think it was, maybe like in my very first week as a sergeant, talking to people who had been my immediate peers for the longest time, and just call them up, hey, I need an inventory on the helmets that we used on a cell extraction, and just dead silence on the other phone, and then just kind of like this deadpan, and not meaning it, in kind of a humorous way, but just no. And then I'm like, well, what the hell now? And then the next thing I know, I have some union steward calling me. Hey, what are you doing calling up over here and asking for that? Well, sorry, but I'm a sergeant, and that's what needs to be done at this moment. So sometimes you don't realize until you're in that position how much toxicity there is, just in the simple things that people are asked to do, and then they're just resistant to all of it. And that's not just questions and feedback, but every single bit of it, from orders to just overall participation. So those are indicators, and the thing that you just have to do is, hopefully you can try and get by that kind of thing by just reiterating what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. But sometimes it's just a matter of, okay, we just have to enforce this through discipline now. And that's a real shame, because that can actually negatively impact the feedback loop. But sometimes there's no other way around it. So anyway, I've experienced that one in some of the most crazy ways that you can imagine. Just because somebody was oppositionally defiant towards authority, the week after I became a sergeant. And to me, it was the craziest thing that I think I'd ever come across with, and that's saying a lot in my career.
Yeah, and I hate it where they're so defiant against authority, and it could be just off a generalized assumption that they wind up not accepting good feedback or something that can help them. I've seen it. It's just they rather feel more comfortable in that us versus them mentality than actually step up and try to solve the matter. And that to me is it could affect the facility, because there's a lot of good advice out there, and sometimes you don't take it because of the person who's giving it to you. And it's like, well, why is that? Well, I just don't get along with them. Okay, well, but that was good advice though. So regardless of you not getting along with them or not, you're now stopping your growth because that was actually good advice. You're just not seeing it because of where that advice came from. So individually, you frame feedback as a tool for growth and focus on humility. Take time to reflect before reacting defensively to questions or input. And we talk about this as evaluating your experience and then maybe even, talking to a peer and, if you have anything that's coming to your mind, maybe go over it with them and kind of helps with the critical thinking too. And then as team leadership, whatever, normalize feedback and promote a culture of continuous learning, provide training on giving and receiving constructive feedback respectfully. And guys, I want to mention something too, kind of like the 5 dysfunctions on a team. If there's trust, that allows for conflict, right? And we talked about that, right? Conflict allows for us to dispute ideas because we know it's not personal. So therefore, we're engaged in conflict because we know at the end of the day, we're being heard and we have trust for each other. So, again, it's not a personalized attack. And when you feel heard, it brings about investment. Now, with that said, there is something else outside of that too, the accountability. So usually when it's constructive feedback, stuff like that, when you have people that are able to engage in conflict, they're able to speak their mind, and then eventually we all tend to come in an agreement, whether, let's not use the word agreement. Let's just say aligned. Once everybody has discussed what needs to happen and we go over the feedback or whatnot, even if we don't agree, at least we're aligned. Now we're all invested. We've all taken part in wherever it is that we're headed. Now we can start holding people accountable. And that's where the feedback and constructive, the constructive feedback comes in, because now accountability is more personal, but I already have your commitment. So if I have your commitment, then the next step is, okay, so now maybe we can get some accountability now because you promised these things. And now I can hold you more accountable because you can't say you were left out because we engaged, we heard what you had to say. And then, again, even as leadership, I'm not looking for agreement. I'm looking more for alignment. And I have those in my books. Okay, so now next one we got is complacency, Russ's favorite topic, and lack of situational awareness. So how does this develop, Russ? So I got a couple areas here. I got routine tasks, fostering overconfidence in judgment and decision-making. I like that. I'm going to repeat that one more time, Russ. Routine tasks, fostering overconfidence in judgment and decision-making. I got fatigue or burnout, reducing mental focus and vigilance. A false sense of security in safe environments with no recent incidences. Or I want to add something to that too. You could also get it in a very active facility where there are incidences, but you just get burned out from going to them all the time. It's just another incident and you're not taking it as serious because you go through the motions every day. And observing others who display complacency without consequences. That's key. Observing others who display complacency without consequences. And why is this a concern, Russ? I got complacency increases the risk of overlooking potential threats or subtle changes in behavior. Subtle changes. It undermines safety and preparedness for emergencies. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said for, first of all, the complacency of routine. You get used to doing things, and a lot of times you don't appreciate, you don't appreciate the gravity of the situation you're in, because it usually doesn't, or maybe it almost never crops up in that way. One of the jobs that I had for the longest time, at San Quentin, the very first thing that I was doing every single day is I would be seating the extended term inmates as they came into the chow hall, and then I would seat the crazy ones, which back then we called them Cat J's. Now they call them triple CMS. And then the next thing that I would do is I would start seating those individuals that were from the reception center part. And then I would seat the level 4 main line. And this just, went on and on. And, I would seat, hundreds or sometimes, thousands of inmates. And we had controlled seating because chairs were at a premium in there. And, there were a lot of days that it was, conflict, but it was the kind that you could kind of shrug off, or you would just say, dude, just sit down, and those kind of things. And so, You could work it for a few days like that, and you would just think, oh, nothing is going to happen. And then the next thing you know, you're in some crazy fight, or, inmates are all fighting each other. One day I had a inmate come in there and take a slingshot to a guy's jaw and spread it, all the way up the wall with blood spurts. And so that complacency of routine can really come back and bite you, because everything that I was doing inside that chow hall was dangerous. It's just that on any given day, maybe it wasn't, or maybe it was. And some people, they just, fall into that groove, and then they become kind of inured, or, just kind of used to the danger, and they don't pay it attention anymore. Other parts of complacency are things like confirmation bias. For instance, you're going by doors, and you're just looking at them, and that's all you're doing. You're just, visually. Well, are you getting up there? Are you rattling them if they have a padlock on it for some reason? Are you checking that padlock, or are you just going with, hey, it looks like it's secure, therefore it must be secure, and we're not calling things into question? And that's part of the last part that I want to get into and just touch on, because this is not exclusively about critical thinking, but what are you doing with your critical thinking asset, which is your brain? Are you gaming everything possible, not possible? Are you gaming everything that probably could go wrong at that moment in time? Or are you just looking at the face layer of that onion and not bothering to look any deeper? What is it that you're considering about the situation that you're in? And so many times it's just that. It's just, complacency, because we're not bothering to question the underlying factors with regard to whatever's going on. And so that really truly is where, situational awareness, complacency is situational awareness perceived but not achieved. We think we know what's going on, but we really don't. And because we think we know what's going on, we're not questioning whether we really know what's going on. And so that truly, is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And it can be very hard to get yourself out of complacency, because complacency requires you not to know the fact that you don't know. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that has gotten a lot of correctional officers hurt and killed in maybe almost every situation that goes on, to one degree or another.
Yeah, and guys, complacency it's a mindset that kind of translates into your actions. I would like to say you feel it first. But with that said, your peers are watching you, and I know they definitely recognize it, because someone's got to be picking up the slack. But sadly, it does have to. It requires management, supervisor, own peers to be on top of it, because for some reason, human nature is always going to try to fall back to what's more convenient, what's easier, and in corrections, there's really nothing easy about our job. So we have to be mindful every day of what we're thinking of, that's allowing our hand to go into our pocket, let's say, during an inmate interaction. And that's another thing. Complacency translates into many different areas: inmate interaction, cell searches, how we implement policies and procedures. So with that said, it does take time, but eventually it will erode on your effectiveness until the point that you're no longer effective. And I will say this: there's a balance here that's insane. If you're at 100% effectiveness, then I would like to think that the inmates are somewhere close to zero. But once you start to shift and balance the scale, and then you start to lessen your effectiveness, then the inmates, hit my hat there. Then the inmates start to get the advantage of it. So the objective is always to keep the scale balanced in our favor, because if you don't, then the percentage of that goes to the other side, which means that if you're complacent, the inmates are going to be very vigilant of that, and they are going to be able to capitalize on that balance, or on balance. All right, so hey Russ, that may be a good way to kind of, when you write your book, that balance scale where complacency does start to shift the balance.
I've got something similar in there. I've actually been working on it this past week.
All right, so I'm looking to get that on the market. And the last one, oh wait, for complacency, individually stay engaged by treating each day as an opportunity to improve. Regularly assess your environment and practice mindfulness to enhance awareness. Kind of play that what if game. That also helps. Teams, leadership, whatever, rotate responsibilities to prevent monotony if you're able to do that, and conduct frequent training and drills to reinforce the importance of vigilance. Isolationist tendencies, that's the word. How does this develop? And we kind of talked about isolation in a few areas here, and this is the last area for us to cover. So how does this develop? So again, this is through the course of time, like everything else. Past betrayals or negative experiences with colleagues creating a level of distrust. Preferences or preference for control and independence rather than teamwork. Feeling undervalued or overlooked, leading to withdrawal. And then internal politics fostering division and discouraging collaboration. I want to mention something. So past betrayals or negative experience with colleagues creating distrust, even though it could be influenced by the environment, we have to make an intentional effort not to allow that to happen. So the intentionality on us for that one. Preference for control and independence rather than teamwork, again, intentionality on us. Feeling undervalued or overlooked, leading to withdrawal, yes, it's influenced by the outside environment, but we can't allow that to influence us so much that we're just separating ourselves. So again, a little bit more of intentionality on us. And internal politics fostering division and discouraging collaboration. That may not be totally on us. Because now when you're talking about internal politics and fostering division, that may be truly out of our hands to resolve. And I've seen that. I've seen that a lot. So that may be something where now you're looking at leadership saying, hey, guys, I got people here that are divided and they feel very, very disenfranchised because they can't do anything about it. And we need to step on. We need to create a culture that they can believe in. Now, Russ, why is this a concern? Because isolation weakens team dynamics and communication. It can lead to misunderstandings, reduce efficiency, and a breakdown in mutual support. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, I think that this one here, can take it can take a lot of different faces. The one that I think about initially the most is just once again, I talked about people unplugging from the process, unplugging from the shift, unplugging from the teamwork aspect of things, and just deciding, hey, I'm going to be a lone wolf. I'm going to do my own thing. And it's just really a failure to go out there and do A, the things that you're supposed to do, and then B, do the things that you ought to be doing that are even above and beyond that. You'll also see this manifest in other people though, that tend to kind of be on their own little power trips where, hey, you know what, I want this own particular part. I want my own little fiefdom. I want my own territory. And they become very territorial about the whole thing. And they won't let other people come in to help them. They want to be the one in charge. They want to be the head honcho calling everything. And they become very possessive about that. I had we had an investigations lieutenant who was just horrible that way. We had really worked to get everybody involved in helping to validate and identify certain gang members and things like that. And it was a true team effort. We were working seamlessly across the lines with investigations and everything else. And he just came in and shut it down because he wanted it all for himself. He wanted all of the glory, but really truly less of the glory, because what, no one was willing to input or could input after that. And so it's really antithetical towards the whole idea of being an integrated, seamless operating unit that still has some structures and divisional frameworks within it. So, and it just, it just breeds the toxicity, because it's like, man, I can't even, I can't even share things that I know with these individuals, because, they don't want me around. And, I don't know. I just think it's a shame. And, that particular person, he was really super toxic anyway. He wasn't there for very much longer, needless to say, thank goodness.
Yeah, and guys, when it comes to isolation, I mean, whether it's situational or whether it's just a dynamic between two individuals, this is a very intentional effort to try to avoid isolation, which means that, if you got to engage in some level of conflict to build things, you should, because in the end, the inmates will benefit from conflict. It actually helps them separate the group, creates a good us first them for them, and basically gives the power into their hands because they could fuel it. They could fuel any separation. So again, the advice I always give people is every day you got to make that intentional effort to connect with individuals, even ones that you wouldn't normally want to connect to. And again, this is for professional survival. It doesn't mean that you have to hang out with them outside of work, but in the meantime, we have to get along, because if we're not getting along, and we are social creatures, usually if staff ain't getting along, who do they wind up going to? The inmates. Sadly. How to address it individually, reflect on the value of collaboration, and seek to rebuild trust with colleagues. That's key. That's definitely an intentional effort, rebuilding trust. Engage in team building activities and remain open to other perspectives. And it gets rid of that assumption. And foster a culture for teams and leadership, foster a culture of inclusivity and trust, address internal politics or cliques that may discourage collaboration, and encourage cross-team initiative. That's why you have to lead up. And I agree. I think the one thing that's out of your control is a culture that's driven by internal politics or cliques, and that's where leadership has to step in. That's a leadership responsibility at that point. If I'm creating the culture that motivates a good collaborative effort, then the intentionality is for you guys. Front line, do what you got to do. Keep yourself engaged. If there's concerns or conflicts, deal with them. Don't let it fester, because the default will always be some level of isolation, because there's the avoidance of conflict that people, as I said, they want to avoid it. It's easier to avoid. But if you have an environment that is driven by internal politics and all this other crap, then leadership hasn't created the culture for it to be collaborative. So now I put the pressure on leadership. And that happens through time, by the way. Russ, what's your closing thoughts, brother?
So, if it were up to me, I would just tell everyone, hey, look, no matter how bad it seems to get, do what you can to stay positive. Do something to, get outside your own particular negativity, and do something to lift your brother or sister up. I think that's a thing that I regularly recommend, not just to people that I know in the business and in corrections, but this is, something that I impart actually to inmates on a day in and day out, in a day in and day out manner, because one of the things that gets them more rooted back toward being proactive and pro-social in their lives is stepping outside of their needs and helping someone else's needs. And it seems to work for even them so much of the time. So my expectation is that it would work for us even better. So just take that minute and do that. And if more people started doing that, within your own unit, within your own facility, within your own department, I think it would well serve everybody, because then what happens is you lessen that negativity, you lessen that toxicity, and people are more likely to stay plugged in. They're more likely to be retained over a longer period of time, which is something that we always want. We always want all of our training dollars to stay right there. And it just, adds overall to the teamwork. And when you foster teamwork, everything goes a little bit better. Everything goes a little bit smoother. And that translates even to things that happen to you outside of work and at home. And so I think that, slowly that's the way you build, a better form of corrections.
Yeah, and guys, I have to agree with Ross 100%. I mean, even when we do these shows, guys, we're open to learning in the process. That's why we don't just give tips that are one-sided, but rather discuss context, to discuss, how these tips could be applied, and then we develop shows off that tangent. I have over almost 1,700 videos, and they're just videos that have evolved into something that truly does benefit you as individuals, but also benefits the agency as well. I would like to think, because they're evolved discussions that crosses into every area, and we're vulnerable. We leave ourselves open to see where that has to go. So discussions like this came because me and Joe had a discussion about shadowing, and then now that turned into this discussion. And then I have maybe a show for the future about good traits that we want to make sure we maintain through the frustration. But as always, guys, the show is Tear Off. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.